All right, okay. So, first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself very briefly, okay? My name's Tim. I have some cards with me if anybody wants to get in touch with my email address. I forgot to put it on the slides, but you can contact me if you're interested about this topic. As I'm sure you probably already know from 30 seconds of listening to me, I'm from England. I graduated from the LSE in 25 years ago, or something like that. I then spent a decade in industry, so I'm not a pure academic, okay? I was working with Shell in France in export marketing for about 5 years. Afterwards, where this all began, I went to work for Castrol, working in brand development, and that was concerned with the Greater Mekong sub-region, okay? The Castrol since been taken over by BP. Still there, Saturn Road, Rajanakam building, BP are still there. That's where it began. After that, I moved into academia, and I did a PhD using qualitative procedures at the start of the decade, 2000. I finished in 2000, started. And then after that, I've been in various types of affiliation with Thammasat University and various other institutions, okay? I've always done qualitative research since the very beginning. One of the reasons I think I was asked to come and... Okay, thank you. You probably can hear me anyway, right?
Right. Yes.
But my voice is very loud, generally. I think years of talking like this. But okay. Yeah, one of the reasons I was asked to come and talk about this is because there is a huge opportunity now for qualitative research generally, and also I think in this part of the world we're looking at constructs and theories that are now in need of development in many disciplines, and here is a great area to contribute to the wider debate about the theories that we use in business and management, okay? Generally, and particularly in the field of international business and management. Okay, so what I want to just talk about you then today, and it's not going to be that long. First of all, what qualitative research is and why you don't need to be afraid of it. Despite the challenges that are there inherent to qualitative research, the nature of different qualitative approaches, its re-emergence in recent years in world-class journals, and the call in journals like the Academy of Management Journal, Journal of International Business Studies. Most of the big journals are now pushing qualitative research more than they have for several decades, okay? So there's a lot of opportunity. That's in recognition of the need now for qualitative research, the state we're in with regard to theories. We've run out of ideas with the constructs we already have. So now's the time to try and induce, refine, and expand on ways of looking at the world as it is now. Okay? So I will then focus on my area a little bit more, which is, my area is like international business mixed with organisational behaviour and cross-cultural management. This is another thing. If you want to get published, the opportunities now in the major journals, the new ideas are coming from looking at things in an interdisciplinary way, of putting things together. That's where you generate new ideas, okay? But yes, it does involve a lot of work because you have to be master of different disciplines. It's not easy, and you have different kinds of reviewers coming at you, So it's not just your discipline. You've got psychologists and anthropologists and economists. They're all coming at you with different directions. So yes, it's not easy. And finally, some of the areas I think there are available in Thailand to contribute. Why in particular? I think you're in a good place to do this kind of research, and there are lots of opportunities for progressing this. My own track record, I mean, why does anybody want to listen to me talking about this? Well, I've put up 4 studies that I published over the years. The latest one was Management International Review, that was last year. But over the years, you can see Journal of International Business Studies. I'm using quantitative measures, but you can generally see the quality of a journal by the impact factor, right? Whether it's international or not is really almost irrelevant. Right? There are international journals that are extremely poor. You know, you can make them international by fiddling around with things on the internet as to where you publish, where you print. You know, there are all kinds of ways. But really as you know, I don't need to tell you this, but things like impact factor give you a good guide, right? JIBS, Journal of International Business Studies, is at around 3.6, which is very high. I was quite surprised. Recently, the Asia Pacific Journal of Management is now up at 4.1. It belongs to the Academy of Management, and they've taken it. It used to be below Asia Pacific Business Review, and they've moved it right up here. Because again, they're clever at understanding how to do this. But even so, it does give you a good indication. Management International Review at 1.1, I think that should be higher. An Asia Pacific Business Review, I'm on the editorial board of that final one. Although I review for all of these, that's at 0.8. It only recently got SSCI accreditation, but that's another thing you need to look at, right? I wouldn't go near journals that don't have that. Qualitative research I've given you a definition. There are many definitions, right, obviously. An umbrella term to cover an array of interpretive techniques, and I'll come back to this, in hopefully plain English, that can describe, decode, translate, and otherwise come to terms with the meaning, not the frequency. I put that in italics, right? The meaning, not the frequency of certain, more or less, naturally occurring phenomena in the social world, all right? So quantitative research, no matter how sophisticated it is, whether it's, you can go on doing modelling structural equations and, regressive, progressive, whatever, multivariate analysis, but at the end of the day, it generally deals with frequencies, correlations, describing what. When you're looking to describe things that are more dynamic, micro level, how and why, etc. Qualitative research has advantages, okay? Now, the general argument is that there's no, or there should not be, any inherent bias one way or the other. Whether you think quantitative is more robust, technical, you can use all these words, or qualitative is more relevant now. I mean, the general argument is, don't bother with that. You don't need to get into that debate. Everything depends on your research question, right? What are you trying to find out? Based on that, you choose the most appropriate methodology. But obviously, we as individuals, generally we're only good at one or the other, right? It's very difficult to mix them. Hence, it's good to get into teams often. But that's generally what it's all about. Qualitative is much more about looking at meaning. Okay? Meaning of how and why, etc. I'll come back to this. Qualitative research is based on different assumptions. Okay? And one of those, these are called epistemological assumptions about philosophy of knowledge. The gap between what you believe and what we think we know. That gap is what we fight over, right? It's actually quite simple. But when you use words like epistemology and ontology, etc., it sounds really complicated, right? For people in the qualitative tradition, what we mean by social constructivism and interpretivism is that reality is socially constructed. Not completely, but most of it is. We are human beings, right? We are not... it's inappropriate when we're looking at human beings working in organisations now to apply the same principles that you would use in the natural sciences. Okay? What this means is that reality is constructed in terms of meaning between human beings. There is no other meaning. There is no point trying to pretend that by putting something into numbers, it becomes objective. The argument is it's totally meaningless. unless it's interpreted, generated, designed, and argued by human beings. And human beings are replete with prejudice and bias and emotion and everything else, okay? So we're in the social sciences, in a dynamic world, a very complicated world now, with people wandering around. And as I'll say in a minute, understanding meaning at this level has a big role to play. The focus is generally on how does something happen? Why does it happen? Over time, for example. These are things you can't get at very easily using quantitative techniques. So there's a lot of, a big call now for understanding process within organisations, and I'll come back to that. So qualitative research tends to be up close and driven by context, for the reasons I've just given. You don't try and come up with a theory, a generic universal theory that is applicable in all contexts. You don't try and achieve that because you think it's not realistic anyway. There is no such thing. Reality is always socially constructed. So it's almost pointless to come up with that kind of rule only for very different kinds of phenomena. So based on that, the methods that we tend to use and that are valued now are longitudinal studies. We need loads more longitudinal work. You don't get reality through the cross-section. Finding the reasons why things happen. When you look at something over a long period of time, it gives you a much better understanding. The cross-sectional study is actually very dangerous, what it tells you. You can do very broad survey-based studies, but they tend to be, I'm not going to say superficial in a bad way, but you get the general idea. You want to explore something in deep, you find out actually what they were saying on the surface. It wasn't true, you know. It happened for all kinds of reasons, human reasons, that were to do with meaning and feeling and prejudice and bias. You didn't capture that in your survey, right? You didn't get at that at all. Completely missed it. And we see this quite a lot. The other technique that's used an awful lot is participant observation. Because the argument is, it's through participant observation that you can really start to understand what's going on around you. You break down, the disconnect from the researcher coming in with his checklist and real people dealing in a real life situations and real conflicts. You don't get at that. So as a participant, there's a lot of scope for coming up with research in a lot of journals. When I mean top class journals, if you think about it, these are not really my field, they're more general. But human relations, which takes almost every discipline into consideration. Organisation studies, Academy of Management, and Journal of International Business Studies is thought of as a quants journal, but they will take qualitative research, particularly when you're looking at special issues. That's a good way to get in. Because they'll look at it as a holistic thing, so they'll take a case study, take this, take that. Case studies are another, obviously, famous way of doing qualitative research. But, okay, there are good case studies, simple case studies, and more complicated studies. So, the requirements, and this is one of the challenges with qualitative research, is that it's top-heavy with theory. It's no good writing a descriptive case study about something and sending it to a top-class journal. It won't even get past the desk editor, as you know. It's okay for a teaching tool maybe, but it's not going to get anywhere. So when you see case studies published, you'll notice that the empirical part of the paper is very small. It's top-heavy with theory. And that's because, again, the requirements for a good qualitative paper these days are interdisciplinarity. You're coming at things from multi-disciplines, and you need to understand each of these. So that is actually very difficult. It's not easy doing this. Also, it takes a different kind of training. And as we all know, generally, in business schools, in most areas of the world, the focus, whatever they say, is on quants. It's on quantitative research. And when you look at some of the books that people use for teaching research methods, they say that they teach both, but actually it's all about quantitative data analysis. Chapter after chapter after chapter. And qualitative is like a tiny bit, you know, and not really given enough weight. But this is changing. Does it make one or the other better? Well, this is what I was saying before. No, not really. I mean, I think people are probably not being honest. If I was to say to you, they're both the same, both equally valuable, it just depends on the research question. I mean, I can say that, but I don't believe it, obviously. And people coming from the quantitative side, they would say this sometimes, but they don't always believe it either. You know, we are biased one way or the other, based on opportunity, based on our own capabilities, based on our interests, and politics as well. What the institution wants, what you were trained in your PhD, what your supervisor's interested in, you know. There are lots of people with research questions that really looking for a qualitative approach, but they then follow the quantitative thing. And I get loads of papers like this in Asia Pacific Business Review in particular, that your question's interesting, but why did you analyse it like this? You know, you need to look at this thing in much more depth. You have an interesting question amongst all this. But instead of exploring that question, all you've given me is like page after page after, there is a positive relationship, there is a negative relationship, there is a positive relationship, you know, very, very superficial. Completely, it's nothing that we need to know. We already know this stuff already, okay? So the need, the opportunity for qualitative research is because of the state of our disciplines. And that, although this is a big topic, you know, that in turn is based on changes that are happening in the world. I mean, the classic example from my field would be the Hofstede framework. I have no idea, guys, what disciplines you're in, right? But Hofstede's model of cultural dissimilarity. This is a classic one, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute, because obviously that's very important in IB. But generally speaking, global complexity and global change, people are migrating around the world. They're growing up, they have parents from different countries, they're growing up in another country, working in an organisation from another, dealing in multiple languages and religions and this and that. And our organisations are become highly complex. Our theories that we have now are not good enough. They don't account for organisations as they are today. I was reading the other day about this in international business, and somebody was arguing, I mean this is in JIBS, in Journal of International Business Studies, but they were arguing that we understand less now about the internal dynamics of multinational corporations than we did in the 1970s. Because we're still using those theories, basically, and the world has moved on. We've globalised. But for many reasons, we've gone down this avenue in IB of quantification. Now it's changing again. The special issue of Journal of International Business Studies that was published in 2011, they did a special issue on qualitative research to try and, you know, gather interest once again. They received a record number of submissions. 118 people submitted for that special issue, more than ever before. There's a pent-up kind of supply of people looking at this. And recently I was at a conference about resistance. Yeah, resistance in organisations. This was organisation studies, EGOS, recently, the special issue workshop. And that's based around qualitative research, obviously. You can't quantify this very easily. 235 submissions. They only took 100. But that's more than double what they'd had before. So they're